The sound of flesh striking flesh is unmistakable. In the pressurized quiet of a first-class cabin, 30,000 feet over the Atlantic, it sounded like a gunshot. A collective gasp sucked the air from the space, followed by a silence so profound you could hear the hum of the engines. All eyes were fixed on two women standing in the aisle. One, a flight attendant in a pristine uniform, her hand still raised, her face a mask of rage and disbelief. The other, a black woman in a simple gray sweatsuit, her cheek glowing a furious red, her expression not of pain, but of a terrifying Arctic calm. The flight attendant had just made the biggest mistake of her life, and the woman she just slapped was about to bring her entire world crashing down. The journey for Dr. Alani Williams had begun 72 hours earlier in a sterile Geneva boardroom. She hadn't slept in nearly 2 days, fueled by nothing but black coffee and the adrenaline of closing the largest deal in her company's history. As the founder and CEO of Aura Aerospace, Alani was a titan in a world dominated by old money and older men. She designed and manufactured the very engines that powered a new generation of private and commercial jets, including the state-of-the-art long-range cruiser she was about to board. The deal she'd just inked with a European consortium was worth billions and would redefine transatlantic flight. But looking at her now, you wouldn't see a billionaire titan of industry. You'd see a tired woman. She wore a simple charcoal gray sweatsuit, custom-made from the finest cashmere, but a sweatsuit nonetheless. Her hair was pulled back in a simple, elegant bun, and her face was free of makeup. The only hint of her status was the Patek Philippe watch on her wrist, a subtle glint of steel and diamonds mostly hidden by her sleeve. She wanted comfort, not recognition. All she dreamt of was sinking into her seat, 1A, and sleeping all the way to JFK. The first-class lounge at Geneva Airport was an oasis of hushed tones and clinking glasses. Alani found a quiet corner, ignoring the champagne and hors d'oeuvres, and sipped on a bottle of water. She watched the other passengers, the men in their crisp suits and the women in designer travel wear, and felt a familiar sense of detachment. They were playing a part. Today, she simply couldn't be bothered. Boarding was announced for Starlight Airlines Flight 112. As she approached the gate, the agent barely glanced at her before saying, "Economy boarding is to the right, ma'am." Alani paused, a flicker of weariness crossing her face. "I'm in 1A," she said, her voice soft but clear. She held out her boarding pass. The agent's eyes widened slightly as she scanned it. The machine beeped green. "My apologies, Dr. Williams. Please go right ahead." Alani nodded and walked down the jet bridge. She was the first to board the first-class cabin, a serene space of cream leather pods and polished wood grain. She found her seat, 1A, a mini-suite by the window, and slid into it with a sigh of relief. This was her sanctuary for the next 8 hours. That's when she first saw Jennifer Larson. Jennifer was a senior flight attendant with 15 years of service. 15 years of smiling when she wanted to scream, of serving entitled passengers who treated her like furniture, and of watching her dreams of a different life fade with every flight. Today was particularly bad. Her car had broken down on the way to the airport. A fight with her ex-husband over a late child support payment was still ringing in her ears, and her supervisor had just reprimanded her for a tiny scuff on her shoe. Jennifer felt a familiar, bitter resentment simmering just beneath her professionally polished surface. She was performing her pre-flight checks when Alani boarded. Jennifer's eyes scanned the woman in the sweatsuit, and her internal computer made an instant prejudiced calculation. Wrong cabin. She'd seen it 100 times before. Economy passengers trying to sneak a peek, or confused flyers who didn't know their place. "Excuse me," Jennifer said, her voice dripping with artificial sweetness. "Can I help you find your seat? Economy is further back." Alani looked up from stowing her small carry-on. "I'm fine, thank you. I'm in 1A. Jennifer's smile tightened. "I'm sure it's just a simple mistake, but this is the first-class cabin." She spoke slowly as if to a child. "Yes," Alani replied, her patience already wearing thin. "This is seat 1A. My seat. Jennifer's eyes narrowed. This woman wasn't confused. She was being defiant. She saw the plain sweatsuit, the lack of a designer handbag, the simple hairstyle, and her prejudice solidified into certainty. This person did not belong here. This was her cabin, her domain, and she would maintain its integrity. "I'm going to have to see your boarding pass," Jennifer demanded, her tone shifting from sweet to accusatory. Alani sighed, retrieving the pass from her pocket and handing it over. Jennifer snatched it, her eyes scanning for a flaw, a forgery. But it was perfect. Seat 1A, Dr. Alani Williams. She looked from the name to the woman's face, a sneer forming on her lips. It had to be a mistake at the gate. There was no way she was a doctor in Seat 1A. "There seems to have been a system error," Jennifer said, holding the pass like a piece of garbage. "You'll need to come with me to the gate so we can sort this out and find your actual seat." The cabin was starting to fill now. A man in a tailored suit, Mr. David Chen, settled into Seat 2B and began observing the interaction with a growing sense of unease. He could feel the tension radiating from the flight attendant. Alani's voice dropped, losing its soft edge and gaining the quiet authority she used in her boardrooms. "There is no error. I am in my assigned seat. Please return my boarding pass." Jennifer felt a surge of righteous anger. Who did this woman think she was? "Ma'am, I am not going to ask you again. You are not supposed to be in this cabin. Either you walk out or I will have security escort you out. We don't tolerate this kind of behavior on Starlight Airlines." The accusation hung in the air, ugly and sharp. This kind of behavior. Alani knew exactly what she meant. For a moment, the exhaustion of the past 3 days washed over her, and all she wanted to do was scream. But she didn't. She had spent a lifetime learning to navigate these moments with ice in her veins. She built an empire by being smarter, calmer, and more resilient than anyone who ever underestimated her. "You are making a very serious mistake," Alani said, her voice dangerously quiet. "I suggest you go and get your purser or the captain before this escalates any further." But Jennifer wasn't listening. In her mind, she was defending the sanctity of her workplace from an imposter. She was in control. She felt powerful. "Out," Jennifer hissed, pointing a trembling finger toward the door. "Get out of first class, now." The standoff in the aisle of Starlight Airlines Flight 112 had drawn the attention of every passenger in the first-class cabin. The air, once filled with the quiet rustle of newspapers and the soft clink of welcome drinks being served, was now thick with a tense, uncomfortable silence. Everyone was watching Jennifer and Alani, two women locked in a battle of wills. Mr. David Chen in Seat 2B, a tech entrepreneur who had dealt with his own share of racial profiling, discreetly positioned his phone on his lap, angling the camera just right, and pressed record. He had a sinking feeling this was about to get much worse. Alani remained seated, her posture radiating a calm that seemed to infuriate Jennifer even more. To the flight attendant, this wasn't dignity. It was insolence. "Did you hear me?" Jennifer's voice was rising, losing its professional veneer and cracking with raw emotion. "I said get out." "And I said," Alani replied, her gaze unwavering, "that I will not be leaving my seat. You can either verify my ticket with your purser, or you can bring the captain here. Those are your only two options." Alani's refusal to be intimidated was like a spark on dry tinder for Jennifer's already frayed nerves. Her terrible morning, the fight with her ex, the reprimand, it all coalesced into a single point of fury directed at the woman in the sweatsuit. This was about more than a seat now. It was about respect. It was about the injustice of her own life, a life spent serving people she felt were no better than her, yet who lived in a world she could only dream of. In her warped view, Alani was a fraud, a symbol of everything that was unfair. "You think you're so special, don't you?" Jennifer spat, her voice a venomous whisper that carried through the cabin. "You think you can just waltz in here and take whatever you want? I've been doing this job for 15 years. I know who belongs here and who doesn't." The subtext was as clear as the window Alani sat beside. People like you don't belong here." From across the aisle, a woman with blonde hair and a diamond tennis bracelet murmured to her husband, "Well, she is being rather difficult. Why doesn't she just show another form of ID or something?" Her husband, however, looked mortified. "Eleanor, be quiet. The flight attendant is out of line." Alani heard it all. She saw the judgment, the discomfort, the few glimmers of support. She closed her eyes for a brief second, channeling the same focus she used to solve complex thrust vectoring equations. Emotion was a liability. A calculated response was a weapon. "Your opinion of who belongs here is irrelevant," Alani stated, opening her eyes again. They were cold, hard, and sharp. "You are an employee on this aircraft. I am a ticketed passenger. Your job is to provide service and ensure safety. Right now you are failing at both." That was it. The word failing struck Jennifer like a physical blow. It was the exact word her supervisor, Margaret, had used an hour ago. "Your performance is failing to meet expectations, Jennifer." The stress, the humiliation, the rage, it all boiled over. The professional mask didn't just crack, it shattered into 1,000 pieces. "How dare you?" Jennifer seethed, stepping closer into Alani's personal space, her body trembling. "You have no idea who I am, what I deal with. You come in here with your arrogant attitude." "My attitude?" Alani interrupted, a hint of disbelief in her voice. "I have done nothing but sit here quietly. You're disrupting the entire cabin. You're refusing a direct order from a crew member." Jennifer was yelling now. Her face was flushed, her carefully applied makeup unable to hide the frantic rage in her eyes. "I am in charge here," Mr. Chen spoke up from his seat, his voice firm and clear. "Actually, you're not. You're harassing a passenger. I've been watching this entire exchange and she has been perfectly calm. You are the one causing a scene." Jennifer whirled on him. "You stay out of this, sir. This is a security issue." "It's a prejudice issue," he shot back, holding her gaze. Jennifer felt cornered, her authority challenged on all sides. She looked back at Alani, who was now slowly, deliberately reaching for her phone. That was the final trigger. In Jennifer's frantic mind, Alani was probably calling a lawyer, or worse, recording her. She saw her job, her meager paycheck, her entire life flashing before her eyes, all because of this stubborn, arrogant woman. All reason left her. There was only a blinding white flash of fury. An impulse, primal and destructive, took over. "You will listen to me!" she shrieked. And with a movement that was shockingly fast, Jennifer leaned forward and slapped Alani hard across the face. The crack of Jennifer's palm against Alani's cheek was a physical manifestation of the tension that had been building for the last 10 minutes. It was sharp, ugly, and utterly final. It was the sound of a line being crossed from which there was no return. For a heartbeat, the world seemed to freeze. Passengers gasped. A baby in the back of the cabin, startled by the sound, began to cry. Mr. Chen's phone, still recording, captured the raw, shocked expression on Jennifer's own face, as if she couldn't believe what her body had just done. She stared at her hand, then at the bright red mark blooming on Alani's cheek. But it was Alani's reaction that silenced everyone. She didn't cry out. She didn't flinch back. She didn't even raise a hand to her stinging cheek. She simply absorbed the blow, her body perfectly still. The only thing that moved was her eyes. They had been cold before. Now they were glacial. The quiet authority she had carried was replaced by something far more potent, an aura of immense, terrifying power that seemed to press down on the entire cabin. She turned her head slowly, her gaze locking onto Jennifer's. In that moment, Jennifer Larson, the flight attendant, ceased to be a person in Alani's eyes. She became a problem to be solved, a variable in an equation that was about to be balanced with ruthless precision. When Alani finally spoke, her voice wasn't loud. It was low, controlled, and carried the weight of a death sentence. It cut through the shocked silence with the clean, sharp edge of a surgeon's scalpel. "You," she said, the single word hanging in the air like a shard of ice, "are finished." Jennifer, still reeling from her own actions, could only stammer, I You wouldn't listen." Alani held up a single elegant finger demanding silence, and she got it. The entire cabin held its breath. "My name," Alani said, enunciating each syllable with chilling clarity, "is Dr. Alani Williams. Not ma'am. Not you. Dr. Williams." She paused, letting the name settle. Then she delivered the next line. "I am the founder and CEO of Aura Aerospace. We design and build the G-77 engines that power this very aircraft. They are my proprietary technology." A ripple of understanding and horror went through the passengers who understood the implication. The woman in the tennis bracelet brought a hand to her mouth. Mr. Chen nodded slowly, his camera still rolling. Jennifer's face, however, was a canvas of confusion and disbelief. She thought this was a bluff, a desperate lie from a cornered woman. "You're lying," Jennifer whispered, her voice trembling. Alani ignored her completely, as if she were no longer worth addressing. Her eyes scanned the cabin and found the other flight attendant, a younger woman named Chloe, who was standing frozen by the galley, her face pale with shock. "You," Alani commanded, her voice like steel. "Get your captain, right now." Chloe just stared, paralyzed. Alani's voice dropped even lower, gaining an edge that could cut diamonds. "If the captain is not standing in front of me in 60 seconds, I will make one phone call, and when I do, Starlight Airlines' entire fleet of long-range aircraft will be grounded by my company for immediate and mandatory safety inspections, pending an investigation into their personnel security protocols. I will personally bankrupt this airline before we touch down in New York. Do you understand me?" The threat was so specific, so technical, and delivered with such absolute certainty that it was impossible to doubt. This wasn't a bluff. This was a promise. Chloe's training finally kicked in. She turned and practically sprinted towards the cockpit. Jennifer, meanwhile, was finally beginning to understand. The name, Aura Aerospace. She'd read it in the in-flight magazine. They were Starlight's new big partner. The sheer cataclysmic scale of her mistake started to dawn on her. The blood drained from her face, leaving her looking gray and sick under the cabin's soft lighting. "No," she stammered, shaking her head. "No, you can't be." But it was the final sentence from Alani that shattered Jennifer Larson's world completely. Alani looked directly into the flight attendant's terrified eyes, her expression devoid of any pity or anger, showing only the cold finality of a judge passing sentence. "Get your captain," she repeated, her voice a deathly calm whisper. "And tell him the owner of this aircraft, GSLX, Dr. Alani Williams, needs to see him. Now." She didn't just own the engines. She owned the plane, the whole multi-million-dollar machine. It was one of Aura's executive demonstrators on lease to buy with Starlight as a show of faith in their new partnership. Jennifer froze. Her mouth opened, but no sound came out. Her mind simply shut down, unable to process the magnitude of the abyss that had just opened up beneath her feet. She had not just slapped a passenger. She had assaulted the woman who held the fate of the entire airline in her hands. In that moment, Jennifer Larson wasn't just fired. She was history. The 60 seconds Alani had allotted felt like an eternity. Jennifer stood rooted to the spot, a statue of disbelief and terror. Her breathing was shallow, her mind replaying the slap and Alani's words in a horrifying loop. The owner of this aircraft. It was an impossible, ludicrous statement that was solidifying into a terrible, world-ending truth. The cockpit door swung open. Captain Michael Miller emerged, followed by the shaken flight attendant, Chloe. Captain Miller was a veteran pilot in his late 50s, a man with a calm demeanor forged by decades of handling in-flight emergencies. But the look on his face now was not calm. It was a mixture of alarm and profound concern. Chloe had clearly relayed the gravity of the situation. His eyes immediately found the disturbance. Jennifer standing catatonically in the aisle, and Dr. Alani Williams, seated in 1A, a livid red mark on her cheek. The captain's gaze flickered to Alani's face, and a flash of recognition, followed by dawning horror, crossed his own. He knew that name. Every captain in the Starlight Long-Range Fleet knew that name. Dr. Alani Williams was a legend. They had attended briefings on the new G-77 engines where her name was spoken with a reverence usually reserved for aviation pioneers. "Dr. Williams," Captain Miller said, his voice resonating with authority and shock. He rushed to her side, his eyes locked on her bruised cheek. "My God, are you all right? What happened?" Alani didn't answer him immediately. She simply looked past him, her eyes still fixed on Jennifer. The captain's use of her name, the undisguised deference in his tone, was the final confirmation. It was the nail in Jennifer's coffin. The reality hit Jennifer with the force of a physical impact. Her knees felt weak. A low, keening sound escaped her throat. "No. Please. I didn't know." Captain Miller turned to Jennifer, and the concern on his face was replaced by a cold fury he reserved for only the most severe breaches of protocol. "What did you do?" he demanded, his voice low and dangerous. Before Jennifer could form a coherent sentence, Mr. Chen from 2B stood up. "I can tell you what she did, Captain. I have the entire incident on video." He held up his phone. "She harassed this passenger from the moment she boarded, refused to believe her boarding pass was valid, accused her of being a security threat, and when Dr. Williams calmly stood her ground, your flight attendant assaulted her." The captain's face grew pale. Assault, the one word that every airline fears. "Jennifer," the captain said, his voice barely a whisper. "Did you strike a passenger?" Jennifer finally broke. Her body sagged and tears streamed down her face, carving paths through her makeup. "She was being difficult. She wouldn't listen to me. I told her she was in the wrong seat. I thought she was—" "You thought what?" The captain pressed, his voice hard as granite. "That a black woman couldn't possibly be seated in 1A? Is that it?" Jennifer's sob was her only answer. The ugly truth was out, exposed under the harsh lights of the cabin. Captain Miller closed his eyes for a moment, absorbing the catastrophic failure of his crew member. When he opened them, his decision was made. He looked at the other two first-class flight attendants, Chloe and an older gentleman named Paul, who were watching from the galley. "Paul, Chloe, escort Miss Larson to the crew rest area in the back. She is to remain there for the rest of the flight. She is not to interact with any more passengers. She is relieved of her duties, effective immediately. Is that clear?" "Yes, Captain," they said in unison, moving quickly. Jennifer seemed to shrink. "Captain, please," she begged, her voice cracking. "It was a mistake, a terrible mistake. I'm sorry, please, I can apologize." Alani finally spoke, her voice cutting through Jennifer's pleading. "An apology will not be sufficient, Captain." Everyone turned back to her. She hadn't moved a muscle, but her presence commanded the entire scene. "Captain Miller," she continued, her tone now that of a CEO addressing an employee. "When we land at JFK, I expect law enforcement to be waiting on the jet bridge. I will be pressing charges for assault. I also expect a representative from the highest level of Starlight's executive team to be there. Not a regional manager. I want to speak to your CEO, Robert Sterling. If he's not on the tarmac to meet me when the door opens, the consequences for your airline will be, and I promise you this, biblical." The captain nodded grimly. There was no question of arguing. He knew he was listening to a direct order from the person who effectively controlled his airline's future. "Understood, Dr. Williams. I will make the calls immediately. We will have a medical kit for your face, whatever you need." "I need nothing," Alani said, cutting him off. "Except for that woman." She gestured toward the now sobbing Jennifer being led away. "To be removed from my sight, and I would like a glass of water." It was a stunning display of control. Amidst the chaos, the drama, and the assault, she was already thinking steps ahead, managing the fallout with icy precision. As Paul and Chloe gently but firmly guided the hysterical Jennifer down the aisle and through the curtain into the economy cabin, a smattering of applause broke out in first class. It was a release of the tension, a validation that justice in some small way was being served. Captain Miller turned back to Alani, his face etched with professional shame and apology. Dr. Williams, on behalf of the entire crew, on behalf of Starlight Airlines, I am profoundly sorry. There is no excuse for what happened here today." Alani just looked at him, her expression unreadable. "It's not you I hold responsible, Captain. It's the system that allowed her to feel so emboldened. And that," she said, her eyes sweeping over the cabin, "is what I intend to fix." The captain returned to the cockpit to make the most difficult calls of his career. The cabin slowly returned to a state of hushed normalcy, but the atmosphere was forever changed. Every passenger was acutely aware that they were not just on a routine flight anymore. They were flying in a vessel owned by the woman in seat 1A, a woman who had just been attacked, and who was now preparing to unleash a corporate and legal firestorm upon the world below. For the next 7 hours, Starlight Airlines Flight 112 became the most meticulously serviced flight in the company's history. The remaining first-class crew, Paul and Chloe, moved with a quiet, almost reverential efficiency. They tended to Alani with a level of deference usually reserved for royalty, anticipating her every need before she could voice it. They offered her champagne, 5-star meals, noise-canceling headphones, and an endless stream of apologies. Alani politely refused everything except the water. She had no appetite. Her mind was already thousands of miles away, working at a furious pace. She didn't sleep. The exhaustion had been burned away by a fresh surge of adrenaline, not of anger, but of purpose. The assault was a symptom of a disease she had encountered her entire life, the casual, corrosive prejudice of low expectations. People looked at her and saw a dozen things before they saw the brilliant mind that had revolutionized an industry. Jennifer Larson was not an anomaly. She was just a particularly virulent example. Alani connected to the plane's satellite Wi-Fi. Her fingers flew across the screen of her phone, her face illuminated by its soft glow. A flurry of encrypted emails and messages shot out across the globe. The first was to Jessica Thorne, the head of her personal legal team. The subject line was simple: "Incident on SA 112. The body of the email was concise and clear, detailing the events, Jennifer's name, the captain's name, and the fact that there was video evidence. It ended with a simple instruction: prepare for litigation. Assault charges first, civil suit to follow. Target, employee and airline. Objective is not financial. Objective is systemic change. Await my signal." The second message was to her chief communications officer, a PR genius named Ben Carter. "PR crisis incoming for Starlight Airlines. Perpetrator, one of their own. Victim, me. Video exists. Story will break upon landing. I want us to control the narrative from the outset. No comment until my press conference. Start drafting a statement. Focus on corporate accountability and the need for diversity and inclusion reform in the aviation sector." The third was to the board of Aura Aerospace. It was a brief factual report of the incident, assuring them she was unharmed and that the situation was under control. She preemptively quelled any concerns about their partnership with Starlight, framing the incident not as a liability, but as an opportunity to leverage their position for greater influence. She worked with a detached, focused intensity. This was her element. The boardroom, the courtroom, the press conference. These were just different arenas for the same strategic battles she fought every day. She was mapping out the next 48 hours, planning every move, every countermove, every press release, and every legal filing. Meanwhile, news of the incident was spreading through the plane like wildfire. The crew, sworn to secrecy, could do nothing to stop the passengers from whispering. The story passed from first class through business and into economy, morphing with each retelling. The flight attendant went crazy. She punched a famous actress. I heard the woman she hit owns the airline. The details were fuzzy, but the core truth remained. Something terrible had happened up front. Mr. Chen, a quiet hero in the unfolding drama, approached Alani's seat about an hour after the incident. Dr. Williams, he said softly, I just wanted to say I am so sorry you had to experience that. It was disgusting. Alani looked up from her phone, her features softening slightly. Thank you, Mr. Chen. Your intervention was appreciated. I have the video, he said, holding up his phone. It's clear as day. Her words, the slap, it's all there. It's yours. I'll send it to whomever you need. Thank you, Alani said, a genuine warmth in her voice. Please, send it to the email address I'm about to give you. You may have just become the most important witness in a very significant lawsuit. Glad to do it, he said with a firm nod. What she did was wrong. People like that count on the silence of others. They do, Alani agreed, but today they will find there is no silence. As the flight continued, the ice on Alani's cheek, discreetly provided by Chloe in a linen napkin, did little to soothe the deep internal ache. It wasn't the pain of the slap. It was the bone-deep weariness of having to fight this same battle again and again. She had built a billion-dollar empire, shattered glass ceilings, and reshaped an entire industry. Yet in that moment, to Jennifer Larson, she was nothing more than a black woman in a sweatsuit who was in the wrong place. She looked out the window at the deep, endless blue of the sky and the curve of the earth. This was her domain. She had conquered the skies with her intellect and her will. She had built wings for humanity, and she would be damned if she let anyone ever again try to tell her where she did and did not belong. The hum of the G-77 engines, her engines, was a constant, reassuring thrum beneath her feet. They were a testament to her power, her genius. And as the coast of North America appeared on the horizon, Alani Williams was not thinking about revenge. She was thinking about revolution. She was about to use all of her considerable power not just to punish one woman, but to shake an entire industry to its very core. The quiet hum of the aircraft was the sound of a storm gathering. The descent into JFK was smooth, but for the people on the ground connected to Starlight Airlines, it was a terrifying freefall. Captain Miller's satellite call from the cockpit had triggered a panic that went all the way to the top. The words "passenger assaulted," Dr. Alani Williams, and "lawsuit" had sent shockwaves through the corporate headquarters. When Flight 112 taxied to its gate, it didn't pull up to the normal terminal. It was directed to a remote stand isolated on the tarmac. Awaiting them was a scene that looked less like a commercial flight arrival and more like a diplomatic incident. There were 2 Port Authority police cars, an ambulance, a mandatory precaution, and a black Lincoln Town car. Standing beside the Lincoln, his face ashen, was Robert Sterling, the CEO of Starlight Airlines. He had been ripped out of a board meeting by his frantic legal counsel. He had personally reviewed the airline's partnership agreement with Aura Aerospace. He knew that Dr. Williams held the power to financially cripple them with breach of contract clauses he hadn't even known existed. Inside the plane, the seatbelt sign pinged off. Captain Miller's voice came over the intercom, but it was not the standard cheerful welcome. Ladies and gentlemen, we have arrived at JFK. For security reasons, we ask that you please remain in your seats until authorized ground personnel have come aboard. Thank you. A moment later, the main cabin door opened. 2 Port Authority officers stepped inside, their faces grim and professional. They were followed by a Starlight Airlines executive who immediately made his way to Captain Miller. The officers walked directly to where Paul and Chloe were standing guard by the crew rest area. Jennifer Larson was escorted out. Her face was puffy and stained with tears. The fight was gone, replaced by a vacant, hollow-eyed despair. She didn't look at anyone as the officers handcuffed her, read her rights in a low monotone, and led her off the plane. The click of the handcuffs was the final, damning sound of her 15-year career coming to an end. Only then were the passengers allowed to deplane. As Alani gathered her single carry-on, Robert Sterling, the CEO, boarded the aircraft. He was a man used to being in command, but as he approached Seat 1A, his posture was one of a supplicant. "Dr. Williams," he began, his voice strained. "I am Robert Sterling. There are no words to express how horrified, how profoundly sorry I am for the despicable treatment you received on our aircraft. It is an inexcusable failure at every level." Alani looked at him, her expression unreadable. She didn't offer a hand, She simply stood, her presence forcing the powerful CEO to stand in the aisle like a chastised schoolboy. "Are you sorry for what happened, Mr. Sterling?" she asked, her voice soft. "Or are you sorry for who it happened to?" The question hit him like a physical blow. He stammered, Of course I'm sorry it happened at all, to any passenger." "And yet it did," Alani said, stepping past him into the aisle. "We will discuss the terms of your apology later. My lawyers will be in touch." She walked off the plane without a backward glance. The moment she stepped onto the jet bridge, the story exploded. Mr. Chen had already sent the video to the email address Alani provided. Her PR team in turn had leaked it to a major news outlet. By the time Alani was stepping into her own waiting car, the video of the slap was already ricocheting across the internet. #Starlight Slap and #Justice for Dr. Williams were trending on Twitter within the hour. The karma that hit Jennifer Larson was swift and brutal. She was fired before she even made it to the precinct for processing. Starlight Airlines issued a statement disavowing her actions in the strongest possible terms, effectively throwing her to the wolves to save themselves. She was charged with assault in the 3rd degree. The video made her infamous overnight. Her face was everywhere. She received threats. Her friends abandoned her. Her ex-husband used the incident to file for sole custody of their children, citing her violent and unstable behavior. Within 24 hours, her life was not just ruined, it was annihilated. She lost her job, her reputation, and was about to lose her family. But for Starlight Airlines, the tsunami was just beginning. Their stock price plummeted 15% in pre-market trading the next morning. Corporate sponsors began to pull their partnerships. Boycotts were organized. The video was a PR cataclysm, perfectly encapsulating issues of racial bias and corporate negligence. The media narrative, masterfully shaped by Alani's team, wasn't just about a rogue flight attendant. It was about a corporate culture that allowed such prejudice to fester. Had Jennifer been properly trained? What were the airline's diversity and inclusion policies? Why was the first assumption that a black woman in a sweatsuit didn't belong? Robert Sterling found himself in a waking nightmare. His airline was bleeding money and credibility, and he knew the worst was yet to come. He was waiting for the phone call from Jessica Thorne, Alani Williams' notoriously sharp lawyer. He knew she wouldn't be asking for money. She'd be asking for a pound of flesh. He knew with a certainty that chilled him to the bone that Dr. Alani Williams was about to dictate the future of his company. The slap on Flight 112 was not the end of the story. It was the beginning of a reckoning. The week following the incident on Flight 112 was, for Robert Sterling, a masterclass in corporate hell. His days were a blur of frantic crisis meetings, the conference room walls plastered with charts showing Starlight Airlines' stock price in a nosedive. The company's logo, once a symbol of prestige, was now the backdrop for 1,000 news segments and late-night talk show jokes, always accompanied by the grainy, damning footage of Jennifer Larson's hand striking Alani Williams' face. Every ring of his phone sent a jolt of anxiety through him. It was either an enraged board member demanding to know how he was fixing this, a key investor pulling their capital, or his chief counsel, Arthur Vance, delivering yet another grim update. Dr. Williams's legal team has gone completely silent. Arthur had said that morning, his voice strained. They're not responding to our preliminary settlement offers. They're just letting us bleed. It's a power play, Robert. They're sharpening the knife. Sterling felt like a man trapped in a burning building of his own design. He watched the video 100 times, each viewing a fresh torment. He saw the arrogance in Jennifer's posture, the ugly prejudice in her words, but most terrifyingly, he saw the Arctic calm in Dr. Alani Williams' eyes after the slap. It was the look of a predator that had been needlessly poked and was now preparing with terrifying patience to devour its attacker. This wasn't a PR crisis that could be solved with a donation and a carefully worded apology. This was an existential threat. Across town, in the gleaming steel and glass tower that housed Aura Aerospace, the atmosphere was entirely different. There was no panic, only focused, relentless strategy. Alani had convened her war council. Jessica Thorne, her formidable chief lawyer, and Ben Carter her communications virtuoso. For 3 days, they didn't just plan a lawsuit, they architected a revolution. A simple payout is an insult, Alani had stated on the first day, pacing before a panoramic window overlooking the city. It allows them to quantify their bigotry, to put a price tag on my humiliation and write it off as a business expense. I will not allow that. So we aim for punitive damages? Jessica asked, her pen hovering over a legal pad. We can make an example of them, a figure so high it makes headlines for a month. No, Alani said, stopping to look at them. That's still their game. Money. It's the only language they speak. I want to force them to learn a new one. Ben, what's the public sentiment? Ben Carter, a man who could read the internet's hive mind like a book, tapped his tablet. Outrage, but it's unfocused. It's aimed at the racist flight attendant. We need to pivot. We make this about corporate culture. Jennifer Larson wasn't a lone wolf. She was a product of her environment, an environment Starlight fostered through negligence. And so they built their weapon. It wasn't a lawsuit designed to win money. It was a set of non-negotiable terms designed to seize control and force systemic change. They spent hours debating the nuances of the Aura initiative, the strictness of the audits, the precise wording of the public apology. Alani was meticulous, overseeing every detail. This was an engineering problem, and she was designing the perfect machine to dismantle Starlight's broken culture and rebuild it into something better. When Jessica Thorne finally called Robert Sterling's office to schedule the meeting, her tone was chillingly polite. The time and place were set. The fate of Starlight Airlines would be decided in a single room, on a single afternoon. The boardroom at Thorne & Associates was on the 50th floor, a sterile, intimidating space of chrome, leather, and a single colossal mahogany table polished to a mirror shine. Robert Sterling and his 3 lawyers sat on one side, looking small against the sweeping backdrop of the Manhattan skyline. They had been waiting for 10 minutes, a deliberate power play by Jessica Thorne, allowing the tension to steep. When Alani entered, the atmosphere in the room shifted. She wore a tailored navy blue dress, her hair styled immaculately. She radiated an aura of such intense, focused power that Sterling felt his own authority shrink in her presence. She wasn't the tired woman in a sweatsuit from the plane. She was the titan of industry who had come to collect a debt. She took her seat opposite him, flanked by Jessica, and offered no greeting. Arthur Vance, Sterling's chief counsel, cleared his throat, shuffling papers nervously. Dr. Williams, Miss Thorne, thank you for meeting with us. On behalf of Starlight Airlines, my client would like to once again express our deepest, most sincere— Save it. Jessica Thorne cut in, her voice like chipping ice. Your sincerity is irrelevant. We're here to discuss reparations, not apologies. Of course, Arthur stammered, taken aback. We are prepared to offer a settlement of $20 million paid directly to Dr. Williams to compensate for the incident. It is, I believe, a more than generous offer to resolve this matter quickly and discreetly. A heavy silence fell. Alani didn't even blink. She looked at Robert Sterling as if he were a mildly interesting specimen under a microscope. Finally, she leaned forward, her hands clasped on the table. Mr. Sterling, last week, one of your employees assaulted me because she decided, based on my appearance, that I was worthless. She looked at a black woman and saw a threat to her sanctified first-class cabin. She didn't see a doctor, a CEO, an engineer. She saw a problem to be removed. She paused, her gaze sweeping over Sterling's uncomfortable legal team before landing back on him. And now you offer me $20 million. You believe that is the price of my dignity. You think my worth, my humanity can be settled with a wire transfer? Sterling felt a flush of shame creep up his neck. That's not. We simply want to make amends. You want to make this go away. Alani corrected him, her voice dangerously quiet. You want a non-disclosure agreement and a press release saying the matter has been amicably resolved. You want to patch the hole in your sinking ship and pretend the iceberg was never there. But I am not here to give you a patch. I am the iceberg. Jessica Thorne chose that moment to slide a thick, leather-bound portfolio across the table. It landed in front of Sterling with a soft, final thud. "That is our settlement offer," Jessica said. "You will find it has no dollar amount attached to Dr. Williams's name. She is waiving all personal financial claims." Confusion flickered across the faces of Sterling's lawyers. This was unheard of. Sterling opened the portfolio with a sense of dread. He read the first page, detailing the establishment of the $50 million Aura initiative, and his blood ran cold. He read the second, demanding a complete, externally managed overhaul of their training programs, and he felt a knot tighten in his stomach. By the time he got to the decade of public audits and the mandated pre-written public apology he himself would have to deliver, he was struggling to breathe. This was a corporate vivisection. She wasn't suing him. She was colonizing his company. Arthur Vance read the terms over his shoulder, his face paling. This is absurd," he whispered aghast. "It's an unprecedented overreach. No court would grant this. We can fight this, Robert. We take our chances in court. This is corporate blackmail." Sterling looked up from the pages, his eyes meeting Alani's. He saw no malice there. He saw no glee. He saw only the cold, hard logic of a brilliant engineer who had identified a fatal design flaw and was now presenting the only viable solution. He knew with absolute certainty that she was not bluffing. She would spend 10 times the settlement amount to burn his company to the ground in court, not for the money but for the principle. She would enjoy it. "Why?" Sterling asked, his voice barely a whisper. "Why go to these lengths?" Alani leaned back in her chair, a flicker of something personal, something deep and weary crossing her features for the first time. "Because my entire life," she began, her voice softening but losing none of its intensity, "I have paid an invisible tax, a tax of low expectations. I've had to be twice as good to be considered half as worthy. I've had to prove my credentials in rooms where others are simply believed. I've had my ideas dismissed only to be celebrated when presented by a white male colleague moments later. I've been asked if I was the caterer at a gala being held in my own honor." She looked directly at Sterling. That slap was not just a slap. It was the physical manifestation of that invisible tax. It was the bill coming due for a lifetime of 1,000 tiny cuts. Jennifer Larson was just the ignorant cashier. Your airline, Mr. Sterling, built the store. So no, I don't want your money. I want you to tear down the store. I want you to use your vast resources to ensure that the next generation of women and people of color who want to conquer the skies don't have to pay the same damn tax I did." The room was utterly silent. Sterling's lawyers had nothing to say. They had come prepared for a financial negotiation, armed with legal precedents and risk assessment formulas. They were completely unequipped for this raw, unassailable moral clarity. Robert Sterling closed the portfolio. He looked at Arthur Vance, at his team of defeated lawyers, and then back at the woman who held the fate of his legacy in her hands. In that moment, he felt a flicker of something he hadn't expected: respect. He slid the portfolio back across the table. "We accept," he said, the words tasting like ash in his mouth. "We accept all of it." The aftermath was exactly as Alani had designed it. Robert Sterling delivered his televised apology, looking like a broken man as he read the words her team had written, admitting Starlight's deep cultural failings. The Aura initiative was launched to great fanfare, celebrated as a groundbreaking step forward in an industry struggling with diversity. For Jennifer Larson, karma was not a grand, dramatic event, but a slow, grinding erosion of her life. She avoided jail time, pleading guilty to a lesser charge that left her with probation and a permanent criminal record. She sold her house to pay her legal bills. The infamy clung to her like a shroud, making employment impossible. She eventually moved to a small, anonymous town in the Midwest, taking a job at a credit card call center where no one knew her face. She spent her days listening to other people's problems, her voice a monotone of forced politeness, a pale imitation of the professional she once was. She was trapped in a quiet, lonely purgatory, forever haunted by the memory of a single impulsive act of malice that had cost her everything. A year later, Dr. Alani Williams stood on a stage at the first Aura Initiative Gala. The room was filled with the best and brightest of the aviation world, but tonight, the guests of honor were the first 50 recipients of the Foundation's scholarships, young, brilliant, diverse faces, beaming with hope. As Alani looked out at them, she felt a sense of peace that no monetary settlement could have ever provided. The red mark on her cheek had long since faded, but its impact was now permanently etched into the very fabric of the industry she loved. She hadn't just gotten justice. She had built a legacy from her pain. She had taken the ugliest of moments and engineered it into a beautiful, soaring future. The story of Dr. Alani Williams is a powerful reminder that the worst moments in our lives can become catalysts for the greatest change. It wasn't just about the satisfying moment of revelation or the hard karma that followed. It was about turning a deeply personal injustice into a force for positive industry-wide reform. She proved that true power isn't just about wealth or status. It's about using your influence to lift others up and ensure that no one else has to endure what you went through. What would you have done in her situation? Do you think the consequences for the flight attendant and the airline were justified? Let us know your thoughts in the comments below. These conversations are so important. If this story moved you, please hit that like button, share it with someone who needs to hear it, and make sure you subscribe to our channel for more real-life dramas that will make you think. Thank you for listening.